YouTube, what's up? Today we are getting right into this haircut. We are doing a drop fade today with a 3 on top with the grain, and so we are just getting right into it. I'm combing everything straight forward, making sure I'm combing out every section thoroughly and just laying all the hair down before I start this process. And next step, we are going to go in with our same guard. We're using the number 3 guard, going open and going up against the grain. About halfway up the head, we are keeping this fade nice and low. We want to keep it very condensed, very dark. We want to make sure we have a lot of contrast going on. And so we're using a lot of that flicking motion with our clipper and just being very measured, taking a few passes with our clipper, and then we are combing it down and seeing what we have to work with and repeating any steps as needed just to make sure we have a clear canvas. Next up, grab your trimmers, go ahead, start creating a guideline at the corner of your client's eye, and then start to make an arch. I go above the ear, go towards the back of the head, and then I will look at the back head on and then connect it with a side. Same thing with the other side. I will go ahead, start at the corner of the eye, create an arch guideline so that way the front hairline is nice and dark and you can have a really clean lineup. And then I will go from the back and connect it. And then once I've done that, I will clear up any hair that is beneath my guideline using my trimmers, just using a gentle flicking out motion. Just very consistently, starting from the bottom, flicking up to just beneath the line. And then once I get to the top of the line, I don't know if you notice here, but I do kind of flick up into the line a little bit, but only using my corners. That's because since I created a hard line with my trimmers, I want to make sure that I start to take out that line to make my initial fading process with my clippers from the zero that I started with my trimmers so much easier. Remember to use light pressure when you're working around the ears, and also remember to stretch the scalp a little bit and give yourself a little bit more room to work with. Next up, we are starting with our clipper all the way open and creating a 1/2 inch guideline. What that is going to do is establish a foundation for a transition. I think this is arguably the most important part of the fade. And the reason for that is the area where you can see the most imperfection and you start to see lines if the blend isn't done really well is the area between your trimmers and your lever open or your half. And so being very thorough with your guidelines, making sure they're consistent and making sure you're really detailed in blending it out is super important. Now go ahead, once you finish that guideline, close your clipper and start to flick out the bottom of the line until you see it shift. Once I see that line shift, I open my lever 1 notch because I'm using a clipper that has a click lever system. I can actually use that to make sure that my blending process is the same no matter what part of the head I'm working on. I have used both and I'm comfortable with both. I do, however, think it's super important for you to be as efficient as possible in what you're doing as a barber. And so if there's ever a way that I can make my work more efficient and have to put less thought in it and therefore less time and energy, then I'm going to do that. I want to make sure y'all can do this with longevity and consistency and do this on multiple heads, maybe 14, 20 heads in a day. And so I think having a system set in place, especially on your clipper, is super helpful. Now in the back here, as you can see, using a little bit more pressure because the back is always a little bit more dense. And now I'm following my same steps on the other side. Lever closed, pulling down on the ear just to kind of stretch out the scalp and give myself a little bit more area to blend, and then flicking up gently. If I'm stretching out the scalp, that means I have to be a little bit gentler with my flicking motion, just so that I don't stretch out my blend too much or go too high. When I'm doing a drop fade, I want to remember that I'm favoring my corners for the most part when I'm blending it out, because the fade itself is curved. Next up, I'm going to put on my 1.5 guard, and I'm going to start my process of fading down into the lever open. And so I'm doing about a 1-inch guideline here, combing the hair very thoroughly and making sure it's consistent throughout all areas of the fade. And although I know that this is a guideline, I'm not trying to set a hard line in at the top. I know that I already debulked with my 3, and so I'm very careful about digging into the head. I'm going up that inch. Once I start to get to the top of that inch, I start to flick out very aggressively so that I do not create more work for myself later on. After I do that, I open my lever and I start to flick out even more, just above that point, to soften that transition from the 1.5 into the 3 even more. Now, as you can see, he does have a colic on that area of his head, which, if done right, really complements the appearance of his fade on that side. Although it is challenging to work with, I think the end result ends up looking really nice. Now on the other side, just working on reducing the bulk in between my 3 and my 1.5. I'm gonna go up a little bit more with my 2 guard, going up about 3/4 to 1/2 inch just to start to reduce that bulk. And ultimately, I know because of how much thickness he's dealing with on the sides, I'm going to have to go through and use clipper over comb to really get that nice finish. But I want to make sure I do my due diligence in this fading portion with the guards. Next up, we are fading down from the 1.5 open, and so I'm taking my 1 guard, starting with the lever halfway open, and I'm going up into where I placed that guideline, going about halfway up, and then flicking out from there. As you can see, I point out the line where I see that weight that is still remaining, and I will go ahead and start to corner that out a little bit. In this area, I don't really want to make anything too light, and so I'm not really using my guard flat against the head at any area. I'm always favoring one side of my clipper because of the amount of contrast that is in between the area with the 1.5 open and the lever open. I want to make sure that I don't increase that too much by bringing up my 1 open. So I'm just using my corners here and focusing on any areas that are super dark. And then next up, I'm going in with my half guard, very gently, just flicking out this bottom line here, using really gentle pressure with my half guard. And I'm mostly using my corners here. His hair, as it gets shorter, definitely gets lighter. And so having awareness of that is super important, because that's going to help you keep the placing of your blend really precise. A Again, going in with my corners, detailing out this part using very gentle flicking motions, stretching down the ear when I need to, just to give me room to work, and also to make sure that the back end of my clipper is not whacking into my client's head, because that is whack. Do not do that. Do not! Anyways, as you can see, it's starting to come together. You can see the transition from the zero all the way into that bulk on top start to look really smooth. And so our next step is going to be going in with our half guard on the back, lever half open, just flicking straight out on the back area. Since the area is pretty flat, I can just go ahead with my clipper against the head and then just flick out from there. I don't have to use my corners quite as much or use as much detail. I'm only using detail, as you can see, towards the back area where there is a little bit more of a natural indent in his head. As you can see, there's a little bit of a shadow there. That's caused by two things: by bone structure and by the density just on the back there. And so I'm able to initially dig in just a little bit more starting out, but then I always make sure that I flick out from there. Now, same thing on this side, just going in with my corners and taking out any dark spots that I see and really trying to eliminate that line in between the lever open and the one right above it. Now, if you follow all the previous steps before this point, blending out this portion should be one of the easiest parts of the fade. Always start with the lever half open, just so that you don't create any light spots, and then flick out. If you see any dark spots beneath that point, you can close your lever a little bit and corner those spots out. But I'm almost guaranteeing you, if you start with the lever half open and just use a gentle flicking motion, it should come right out for you. As you can see, my camera's a little bit out of focus, which I apologize for, but there are some dark spots right there on the back of his head. And so we are not trying to go up super high and get rid of those, but rather just corner those out, while also being mindful of the fact that we want to maintain this shape. There are dark spots there for a reason. We don't want to lighten everything up too much and make a dent in his head and make the shape look super off. But as you can see here, I've put my one guard back on and I'm just attacking that spot just a little bit with my corners. I want to maintain the shape, but I want to just increase the lightness of that area just a little bit. Same on the back here. I see just those two areas that are a little bit more dense, and so I'm flicking out with my one open and making sure that I have a consistent level of darkness throughout the entire area of the fade. As you notice here, I comb pretty consistently every time I make a few passes with my clipper. This is just so I can let the hair get a little bit of a reset to where it actually lays on the head, and I know exactly what I need to target. Here I'm using clipper over comb. When I do clipper over comb, I take the comb, lift it from the side of the head, flush to the head initially, and then I will usually project out to a 35 to 45 degree angle, and I see the hair at the top of the fade where I left off with my 3 open, and I blend up from that point and just take all those hairs that are sticking out that I can see didn't get cut. So as you can see here, I project out, the hair at the bottom of the blend falls out, and I know that I can safely take out the hair above that point, and it's going to make my blend that much more seamless. Using a 45 to 35 degree angle is also going to help you preserve shape. I recommend using clipper over comb to help you maintain some fullness on the sides and preserve the shape while also having a great blend. As you can see, just hit my client with some holding spray. Now we're gonna lock it in place with some cold air. Once I've done that, I can go ahead and start lining him up. I will start with my trimmers on his C-cup area. He does have a little bit of overhanging hair, and so I'm going to go ahead and create his corner. Then I will start at the bottom and create a little bit of a half moon shape here. I start where the front of the sideburn is, and then I create a half circle shape. It doesn't have to be an exact half circle shape, it just has to follow the natural arch and roundness of the C-cup. Once I've done that, I've established a pretty good foundation for my lineup. My next step is going to be refining that just a little bit, and once I've done that, I can start to get into the other portion of the lineup, which is going to be his front hairline. As you can see here, I do put my fingers on each side of the hairline just to see if one side is higher than the other or if it's pretty straight across. Everyone has a natural high and low side, and so being aware of that helps me to know which side to start on. I usually start on the high side and line it up as naturally as I can, and then I'll match that on the low side because that will help me create symmetry and balance with the lineup. I will start in the center. I will take it all the way to their corner. Usually line up the vertical bars if they're pretty easy to take out right away. And then I will go ahead and match that on the other side, starting in the center still, gently tapping my trimmers and going from there all the way to the corners. Once I do that, I can go ahead and look at it, see how straight it is. I always double check my lineups in the mirror and then look at them head on, make sure that I address any flyaways, any overhanging hairs, make sure everything is precise as possible, and then I can touch it up as needed. Whenever you're doing lineups, always make sure to use your second pair of eyes. You ask me, Jeezy Fates, what even is your second pair of eyes? I'm so glad you asked. Your second pair of eyes is your mirror. Your mirror is going to show you things that you didn't initially notice when working on your fade, and it also gives you a good reset and a fresh perspective on what you are working with. I will go ahead and comb everything down once more. As you can see, there's a little bit of an overhang towards the center, and so I will go ahead and address that. Any area that's thicker in the lineup too, I usually make sure that I comb down a little bit more and touch up twice, just so that everything looks nice and consistent in its thickness throughout the head. Now I'm going to apply some waterproof enhancements here, and unfortunately I picked the wrong enhancements. My client does use enhancements. He should be using the darkest brown enhancements, but I only had medium brown. Shame on me. but we're gonna lace them up either way. The only issue with using a lighter color of enhancement on your client is it might be a little bit noticeable with this enhancement, and with lighter brown enhancements in general, there might be a little bit more of a reddish tint. And if you use a darker enhancement on a client who has a lighter hair color, it might be a little bit more gray or blue. And so making sure you have the right enhancement is super important. And right now, your boy is clean. The lineup is looking super nice. And now my last step is going to be looking at the symmetry of the enhancement application, because I want to make sure that I'm consistent in any areas that I may have over applied the enhancement. I want to make sure that every area of my line work is super consistent and super clean. And once I've done this part, then I am finished with my fade. If you guys thought this was helpful, thought it was useful, if y'all had any takeaways, if y'all enjoyed this video, then please consider just leaving a comment, leaving a like, hit subscribe if you want to see more. G-Eazy Fades out. Peace.